Hello. Is there anybody out there making noise? Yeah, we got one there. One is alive, two is alive. We got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, welcome to this last session, this last panel of this long day. I got three really exciting people here next to me that I will introduce shortly. And I guess all of you is here to understand and how mice can spark meaningful inclusion and why brands' future depends on it. And this is important stuff. And I think you'll find a lot of good takeaways from this panel. My name is Jan Landin. I'm from Stockholm, Sweden, normally. I'm head of a company called Funka and Accessibility Cloud. I work daily on when it comes to digital inclusion. Accessibility, but today we're going to talk about inclusion at large. So I will be the moderator for this session, and we will also, and I have my friend over here somewhere, it's you. You will have a hand mic. I think we'll use, because we're so few, we use the mic. This is actually turned on as well, so you can pop that, but I will just encourage you to have, if there's any question that comes in mind, that we want to put to the panelists, just raise your hand. Even during the discussion, we do that. I think that's very important. We will have a Q&A in the end. All right, so let's get going. Let's just do a round of introduction. To who you are, where you're from, and why you're sitting here.
Okay.
Let's start with you, Michael.
All right. So my name is Mikael Ek. That's the easy one. I work for BCD Meetings and Events as the Managing Director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Based in Stockholm, Sweden, just like you. It's a nice coincidence, by the way. So why am I here? Well, I hope that you leave the session that I can share maybe a perspective from my role as the MD of the company. Why inclusion is important, and what companies can do to make sure that it stays top of mind when talking to customers, talking to the employee base, hiring, acquiring companies, and just setting the right culture and combine that with the right values.
All right, good.
Easy.
Bruce?
Well, yeah, thank you. I'm Bruce Rose. I work for a company called Live Group. We're an events agency based out of the UK, though we work globally. My job title is Head of Audience, and I think that's probably a good bridge to why I'm here. And it's not necessarily as anything other than an avatar for the audience out there, and how we have discovered it through data and how that intrinsically links to this idea of inclusion.
So in a way, you guys are sitting there.
That's it, yeah. I will
That's you.
be the hive mind for everyone in the audience. And so a lot of the work I do is involved in talking with people, asking the right questions, listening to the answers, and hopefully transferring those into some useful insights. And I just think on the topic of inclusion, as I know some people do find it a bit difficult to put their hand up and grab a microphone, there is also Slido.
Yeah.
So you can write a question if you'd rather not go through the hell of putting your hand up and grabbing a microphone. But that is me.
All right, thank you, Bruce. Megan?
Yes, hello. You can call me Meg. I'm originally from the US, but I currently live in the UK, and I work for The Bulb as a sustainability manager. Now you guys may be thinking, sustainability manager on the stage, why is she here? I'm also an advocate for inclusion and accessibility, which brings me to why am I here? I have something called an invisible disability. You can't see it, but it still affects me, and I have it. And it's really impacted me, especially during the pandemic. So I'm here as a spokesperson to try to improve those conditions for people with disabilities and create better inclusion and better understanding of what is accessibility. So I speak for those coming up behind me.
So Megan, can I just ask you a question? You've been here now for a full day.
Yes.
So how is this rating in terms of inclusiveness? I mean, since we're going to talk about meeting inclusiveness, what's your
I apologize if any of you are here as part of planning on the IBTM team. The air conditioning, not only is it so cold, it's so loud that I'm struggling to hear my fellow panelists I really have to pay attention to make sure I'm not missing what they're saying. But the air conditioning is all that I can hear. There are other things, but for right now, it's the aircon. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that first insight. Well, Bruce, I just want to kick off. I know that you have a lot of data in terms of audience and demography. And if you would like to just to share some of that in terms of in relation to what the topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think this actually almost comes to the subheading of the panel, which is, and why your brand's future depends on it. So a lot of the work we did initially with those audiences was all about personality profiling. Not necessarily the full personality, but when people are at an event, how do they like to behave? It's a lot easier to focus on that slim area of behavior as opposed to, what if someone's full personality is like. But when we started doing that, we started to widen the scope ever so slightly to look at two things that were quite critical to us. One was diversity, and the other was sustainability. And how much do those topics and needs drive the audiences? Now, bringing my own bias to bear, before I really got to grips on the topic, I assumed that the general audience would have a baseline of around about 50% for both, which means, but like they understand it as an issue, but not as a critical issue. That, oh yes, we need to make our panels more diverse, and yes, the event needs to be as close to carbon safe as it can, or carbon neutral as it can, but if it can't, oh well. That was my gut reaction. And then we got the first set of data back, and I was a little bit shocked by the results, and then we got more and more and more, and that baseline has continued. And so your average audience has this, for diversity first of all, is about an 80% weighting, which means that hearing voices different from their own, from a wide variety of cultures, from viewpoints and perspective other than those that they are used to, is favored by like 80% of delegates. Like it's a critical component for them. And it's getting to the point now, because these audiences have been starved for so long, that it's growing over time. The less this is served to audiences, the more critical it becomes. And obviously, I say this on an all-white panel right now, and that's something that the managers of the events of tomorrow, and I literally mean tomorrow, next week, need to bear in mind. How are we representing voices? Because our audiences are screaming out for it. And sustainability is behind, but only slightly. The weighting there is about 77%, in that if you are running an event that is flagrantly just flaunting any sort of desire to be carbon neutral, you're going to risk annoying and essentially turning those people away. And I think this comes to this idea of the language that we use to talk about meaningful inclusion and diversity and sustainability. We can coach it in easy language of, oh, well, we'll have a diverse panel. What we're really saying when we don't is that we are excluding people from the conversation. And that's how we need to begin to frame the conversation in more black and white terms so that we can begin to change things. But the core takeaway that I'd have everyone here remember is it really matters. It matters to all audience cohorts. It matters across cultural boundaries. And it matters no matter it's in the private or public sector. And so we need to get a grip on it.
All right, thanks. Now thinking of you, I mean, do you have the same experience when you look at new or organizing conferences and meetups that Bruce just explained?
Yeah, for sure. We had an employee event, I think it was a month ago or so, and we really want to make sure that was driven around sustainability. And it was an interesting factor because we also got the feedback afterwards, and people were complaining that they had to go up early in the morning to take the train. Why can't I just go take a flight? That would save me some time. It would be more convenient. So we got some criticism there. Yet the end result of the event was still positive. People were more engaged after the event. Everything was good. So we had a very high sustainability focus. Vegan food, making sure everything was measured in the CO2 offset and everything. And yet I felt personally a little bit, damn, we let people down, right? But I'm sure that if we didn't have the sustainability focus, we probably would have been asked, how could you have an event, times like this, you didn't have any sustainability focus at all, people flew in, it's just like old days. Where are you as a company? Now we did it, but I don't know what the answer was. But yeah, that's just an example that we did recently, yeah.
So I just read a survey which was made of Accenture analysis. So there's something called the Disability Equality Index. I don't know if you're aware about that. Basically measures, how well a company is doing. And they did some research and found out that the companies that were rating high in this actually has twice as likely to have higher shareholder returns, which is really interesting, 27% higher revenue, and 30% better performance in economic profit margins. So do you believe there is any of you there is a correlation between this, or is this just coincidence?
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So yeah, the easy answer is they're so intrinsically linked. I mean, this is where we talk about language. You're fundamentally saying, is having a place where people feel like they belong worthwhile? And the answer is unequivocally yes. I think about what you said, Meg, before we were talking. It's your story to tell, so I shan't say it, but I was thinking just then, what if it was the inverse? And you had a relationship with your kind of partner at your work which was entirely different, you wouldn't be engaged in the same way at all?
No, so the story that was told was I tend to not tell employers about my disability until after I've been hired because I don't want a bias against me. That works great in face-to-face interviews because I can get on fine. But the job that I have now was conducted over Teams because, it was during COVID when I got hired and we were not doing face-to-face interviews. I was straight up transparent with my now boss saying, look, I just wanted to let you know I have a hearing disability. If I'm a little slow to answer questions, I promise I'm not dumb, bumbling, anything. And she really appreciated that honesty. And she works with me to make sure I have everything I need to succeed at my job, which makes me better at my job. And I want to do good for her because I know that she has my back. One example is we never take Zoom meetings. Anytime she sees a link that has the word Zoom, she says, hey, can we change to a Teams or a Google Meet? Zoom does not have captioning at my end unless the meeting organizer puts it on, but I don't know. I have to trust the person to be able to put it on. So she advocates for me to make sure that I have what I need to succeed at work, and that makes me an incredibly happy employee.
Yeah, and I had an example actually last week. We were contacted by a person who was applying for a job, and she was quite upfront and saying, listen, I am disabled, so can I even apply for this job? And we're like, of course you can. And she said, well, listen, this is the 10th company that I'm contacting in the events industry. The 9 companies that I've spoken to previously have said no. So I was sort of giving up. So we got the application now. I don't know who's going to be, the final recruitment. It's not sitting with me, it sits with the team, but it is quite telling that it is a challenge. And it's a shame with those stats that you just provided that companies seem to be overlooking it.
Yeah, and that's the baseline, is do you think people have worth? And I hate to go back to something that reductive, but it really is true. Do you see all people as having worth? And do they have a valuable voice to share? And we talk a lot in business about resiliency and the idea of you can have many different perspectives. Well, resiliency also means getting people outside of the mold of the usual world. And I think about, I have a daughter that's slightly on the spectrum. My wife has ADHD. They exist in a world that refuses to adapt to them most of the time. So they have perspectives and thoughts that are incredibly valuable that sit outside of that. And why wouldn't you want to have those in your teams forming the opinions that are going to shape the future of your business? You'd be insane not to. And that's why, again, I really hate coming back to this, but it's so critical. Your future depends on it. Because if you don't have these voices, your competitors will, and your competitors will benefit from it.
So I just had a conversation with the head of human resources of SAS Institute. They have 60,000 employees. That was just the other week. They have gone from having employees in average staying for like 7 years. After the pandemic, it's down to 24 months, 3 years, because the employees do not feel so connected with the corporation not coming to the office. And one of their takeaways was that they need to invest much more in this. Diversity, digital inclusion, building the company culture. And also the findings was that the younger generations, this is one of the key features that working for a brand that is really dedicated in diversity inclusiveness. So when it comes to how do you, if that is the case, and that is now, it's obviously some companies is going to be hurting not understanding this, because the employees is going to work somewhere else. But I'm just want to come back and look at how can this industry empower that in somewhat. I mean, how can they contribute to companies to understand? Because obviously this is an arena where we can share thoughts, and we can have good practices and so forth.
I mean, I have an answer to this, but I don't want to tread on any voices. But I can at least start us off, and it comes back to the data piece. I gave a talk earlier today about some of the findings that we have in terms of the data that we've analysed over the past 24 months. One of the things that this industry, and events in particular, are extremely good at is shifting this idea of the Overton window in a given culture, which is to be able to bring perspectives together, to kind of engender an open discussion, a frank discussion of different viewpoints, and reach a consensus. It's something that is incredibly difficult to do with a bit of media. You throw someone a video, these are our values, and they go, no, this is what someone that's not me has decided are our values. Events have this ability, certainly the MICE industry is all ultimately about connection and bringing people together. And I think certainly to kind of pin on the point about people don't want to work for companies that don't have a valuable culture and a valuable mission, how that mission is created has to be done in an event that's been built for it. And a lot of the work we're doing with companies at the moment is around, we think we have our values, but we don't know, and we want to bring people on board, and we want to ask them what kind of company they want to work for, and we want to readdress this from the ground up, and that's the opportunity that this industry provides. We excel at bringing people together, and ultimately creating that spark of human connection and seeing it transfer into a mission statement or a set of company values is an incredibly powerful thing that our industry can enable.
I would imagine the physical meeting is really important, because they've been trying to build these values through the digital world somehow. So can you tell Meg, when you have meetings, if that company has thinks about that? I mean, can you, in that digital meeting, can you see the difference between somebody who's worked with diversity and inclusion and who is not?
Yes, I mean, so people who are not very open to being inclusive and change will give me pushback when I ask, can we do this on a different platform? Because they're comfortable with the current platform they have, so they want to stay comfortable instead of making sure that the person showing up to the meeting has what they need. I can use digital events as an example, because those are the ones that I really, really struggle with. Captioning is expensive, but it's 2022 going into 2023. Why is it not already built in? Like, people talk all the time about how technology is going everywhere. We've got, what's it called? The virtual place.
The metaverse.
The metaverse. We've got the metaverse coming on, and you're telling me you can't build in captioning to every single digital virtual events platform there is out there. And don't even get me started with how inaccessible the metaverse can be. I could take a whole 45-minute session.
And that's what we're doing now. So.
Yeah. So, but that's also when AI comes to play. I know that for you who doesn't know, actually in the Microsoft PowerPoint, it comes out with captioning in PowerPoint. So one trick here is to actually turn on a PowerPoint presentation. You will get free captioning to any meeting.
But even this idea of budgets is a brilliant example of innate bias in the industry. Because you say there, Meg, oh, well, captioning is expensive. But people don't question the budget necessary for a stage. Why isn't captioning just built in as one of those things that's a necessity at the events we run? And a whole host of other accessibility requirements. The only reason is comfort and the inertia of past events moving forward. And so there are amazing free tools. And if you've worked yourself in a situation whereby your budget's taken up that's no excuse not to have something like captioning. But the more interesting question to ask is, why didn't we budget for this in the first place? And it comes into the language we use. We're not adding on captioning. We're not excluding people that have hearing difficulties. It's that simple, or understanding difficulties.
I would like to also mention that there has been research that found that 80% of people who use captioning don't have hearing loss or are deaf. 80% of people. That means 20% are people like me who actually need them.
I have captioning on Netflix because the kid is upstairs asleep, the volume's at 4, and if the child wakes, everyone's day's ruined, so we're just going to watch it with captions, and that's fine.
Yeah, like any video.
Very important. That's my core takeaway, actually, is
that's good.
Always put captions on.
So let's go back. And I know, Michael, that your company's been working a lot with inclusion and kind of worked it into your corporate policy. If you would like to elaborate around that?
Yeah, sure. So we have what we call BU at BCD. So it's basically 5 councils covering all our regions, so NORAM, LATAM, EMEA, UK, and Asia Pacific. So we've got employee base, part of these councils, working as a sponge, really, and making sure that we have a finger on the pulse, listening into what's happening in the organization, and advising as well. But it also starts with the management team, making sure that the management team are trained, informed about how inclusion is important in our day-to-day work, whether that's hiring or working together. I mean, you mentioned yourself how important it is for you with your manager, right? So if your manager, it sounds great, but if we talk about culture and the values, but that is around the behavior, right? You can have excellent values at that company, but if it's not enforced by the right manager with the right behavior, it falls flat on its feet.
Yep.
So yeah, that's what we do. And looking at other areas of, we talk about IQ and EQ, CQ, our culture awareness, how important that is, which sometimes can be overlooked.
Can I ask a question on the you say obviously management training?
Yeah.
Because in my experience, obviously people at the top of companies tend to be male, tend to be white, tend to be a bit older in the tooth, and tend to like their comfort and not necessarily change perspectives easily. So how did you go about that? Because I imagine it's not just awareness, it's also belief. Because, I mean, you say it there, your culture is only as good as the worst behavior that you allow. And so that's led from the top. How did you go about that?
So also we started in the executive team, making sure that we had the trainings and we understand more around what needs to be done. And I can be honest and say I didn't know much. So it was helpful for me to become a slightly better in what I do. And then I sort of take the ball and then I work with my team, making sure that they are informed, enlightened, and that we can work together. But if it doesn't start from the top, work its way down, I think it's going to be difficult. Yet we've got the councils as well, working from sort of down and up, making sure that we have a good dialogue and that we don't overlook things. It's not by any means a perfect organization, and we've got many things to do. But the council work is that sponge and picking up what's not working, but it's also working in the way that it's also addressing where we have successes. And why is that really, really good, and why is that working well there? And that's something we could maybe use in other regions as well. So that's a little bit of how it's set up.
But I would imagine that being attractive, I think, as a corporation, being able to display those values is extremely important. And do you see a way that you do that differently today than you did before? I mean, do you present yourself in a different way? If this is one of the key, key features for you to be attractive as employer?
Well, I go back to culture. For me, culture is what we have as a company, the company values plus behavior. Without the behavior, we don't have the right culture. And that's essential. So in my role as MD, it starts with me. If I don't live up to those behaviors, I can't expect anyone else to do it. And then I'm working with my team to do it. And it is important. And we can see that in the surveys as well, specifically in the next generation, Generation Z, is coming to, well, already, but that's the first connected generations coming in, and they're going to challenge us as an employer for sure. So we need to do it. We must do it, and we have to do it.
So is Generation Z attending these types of meetings, Bruce?
Yeah, and 2030 we'll see Gen Z outnumbering the boomers in audience makeup and in the workforce. And it's a radically different cohort of people. People that want a mission, people that believe in inclusion in a way that I would say older generations have a harder time getting to those same beliefs, not from anything intrinsic to the generation, but because of the cultures that they were brought up in. And I think a point I'd jump in on is this idea of understanding that this conversation runs throughout the company. And yes, it must flow from the top, but it also has to enable a very powerful voice at the bottom. The problems happen when the bottom doesn't talk to the top and vice versa. A live group, and we're a much smaller agency in the grand scheme of things, but we have a people team, and I'm lucky that Becky, who heads that people team, is in the audience here, and she ensures that everyone from our newest starter through to someone that's been at the company 15 years like me has an ability to talk to the exec team and the board and voice their opinion. And there's almost an agreement that those discussions will be taken seriously. And we've had to radically change how we approach things like back to the office and the kind of ways and hours that we want people to keep based on that feedback, because ultimately we want to create a space where people feel like they're valued. And that's what it comes down to. I imagine it's even more different when it's a micro organization almost.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer for that question, but I do have a question for you guys, because we're at an event for event organizers. Do you find that when you do inclusion work in your companies, it also kind of trickles down into the experiences that you create? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I think the benefit of working at an agency of like a mid-level size, so we're about 40 people, is because we're also cross-collaborative, the conversations that we have innately impact the work we do with clients. And so when someone who has historically not had much of a voice shares an opinion, that then ripples through the company. You can see it even in the language that we use. And so suddenly the conversations we have with clients change, and the way that we build agendas can change, and the way that we think about content can change. I think we have long undervalued the power of a single contradictory voice. And it takes incredible bravery to be that one voice sometimes in that room. And so it does make a difference. It's always valuable. And ultimately it comes to the point of, well, do we want to have more things in our toolkit to deal with a given client's problem or less? And having more inclusive attitudes and doing the work always leads to more.
But do you see anything, I mean, I'm following your question there, is there anything tangible you will see changing within the events? It's about who's on stage, or do you see anything else?
The industry is changing glacially,
yeah,
because it does. And that's, I think, a frustration. I think my view is it's going to speed up as the people that run events and the people that own the companies that run events get younger. The pace of change will increase, and we will see much more of a defined impact. Now, things are already getting better. I definitely see in terms of when organizers are asking for speakers, they upfront with a diversity question, which is brilliant. That's a brilliant start. The sustainability thing, which has been lacking in the past, is now seemingly taken more seriously. There's some great organizations out there that are doing more tracking. Obviously, Meg, your organization works heavily on it. Talk to you after. So it is changing, but not at the speed it needs to. But I'm quite happy at that state, because ultimately the change will happen. It's just whether the people currently in the industry want to be ahead of that change, or whether they want to be playing catch up with the organizations that get it right.
So Meg, how about you? What do you see in an inclusive event from your perspective? What are you missing? What will be there to make it more inclusive?
I think I'm a little bit cynical, because it's towards the end of the year. It's been a long year. If you ask me again in January, I will have a completely different outlook. I think at this point, I don't really know because it affects me personally. So I try to kind of not think about it and focus on my work, which is sustainability. But inclusion, rumor has it, is going to be really, really big on the 2023 agenda. So I am hopeful that this next year will be better. But I think until I see people walking the talk and putting in the work to make it more inclusive and talking about, how can I do better? How can we do better? I don't know. I think right now, in this moment, in the end of November, we're approaching the holiday season. I'm a little cynical, but find me on LinkedIn and ask me in January. We'll have a totally different answer.
It's the dark months. They're not helping.
But it has improved, right? So last time I was here is 2019.
Okay.
We didn't have inclusion on any topic, I think. Now we do. We're sitting here, we're talking about it. So it's, to your point, it is improving, it's moving. Is it going fast enough?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. At this time next year, you can do the research for us and report back to us.
Deal.
Good.
Is that a contract now? I'm locked in.
Hey, I'm X.
It's okay, it's not recorded. Oh, wait. It's fine.
Hey, IPTM, you too. Hey, everybody.
I think that one thing that kind of strikes me is that I think everybody we understand, we understand the inclusiveness, we understand the diversity, we understand that will, diversity is proven that if you have a diverse team, it will create innovations, which is definitely needed. But where do you start? I mean, that's as an organization, large or tiny like yours. Where do you start? I mean, you said we need to start with senior management. Is that? But how do you trigger it off, and how do you make it trickle down?
We start by doing things.
Yeah.
So you go, Meg.
Just do it, right?
Actually, I attended the Trends report this morning, and Gabby from Diversity Alliance said something really good I didn't even think of. She said you start with your people and figure out what is your culture. And then that way, when you're bringing more people in, you can figure out what you need to bring in to fit into your culture. And I found that really interesting because when I think about doing these things, it never occurs to me you should talk to your team first and figure out what your culture is before going out and finding what you need.
Whereas I think just do things. I think that point is really valuable. But I'd hate to be in a situation where the internal teams are diverse, but then they're just running the same cookie cutter events. And you get into this, well, where do we start? Well, you just have to start by doing it. There is, understanding it's an issue is the easy part. The hard thing is then doing the work. And so if you take the diversity question, something that was brought to my attention through Becky, and we're talking about it tomorrow, is the power of an agenda. When you have a project management meeting, whoever writes that agenda has incredible power. And just adding the line item, diversity of speakers, is an incredible step because then the conversation is started. And then you can have an honest conversation as an organization. Do we want speaker quotas? And I know some people view that as little too controlling, but I would argue it's probably necessary. And one of the things that I've noticed is in the past when we talked about the diversity of speakers, we were met with smiles and nods, and yes, that's very important, and then nothing changed. And then when we came with the same question, but with a data set behind it saying, and what about the diversity of speakers? Because looking at your audience, they have this incredible need for diverse speakers. Suddenly people are willing to change. Oh, right, okay, well, we need to make sure we have people from both different cultural backgrounds, but different socioeconomic backgrounds, different industry backgrounds. And so we can begin to build up a quota sheet of how those people can look. And so it has to just start with having the conversations. And the conversations initially are probably going to be a little uncomfortable because we're getting people out of their comfort zone. But that's okay.
But you think the mice industry can be the spark to that?
Yes.
The spark to change, and do you have a responsibility to do that, even if it's uncomfortable? Michael?
Yeah, I think so. But you're absolutely right. We have to do it. Just because it's difficult, just because you're not comfortable in speaking about it, you have to do it. I said it earlier, right? So I I was enlightened by the training, understanding pronouns, how people want to be talked to, addressed to, the cultural differences, high context, low context, was challenging me as a person to try to become a slightly better person. It's always difficult with change, but that should not be an excuse for not doing it. And it's a very creative environment in the mice industry, or it typically is anyway. And we need to attract creative people as well, the next generation. To your point, if we don't stay on top of this, it's going to be difficult for us to maintain and drive really good creative events, right?
And you have to be optimistic about it. That's the thing, is I know it's sometimes think, well, nothing will change, and that's all very easy. But I know, and I guess this comes from a deep personal belief in people, that if I took... there is a client I can think of for whom getting captions signed off every time is a nightmare. But I also know that if I put them in a room with Meg for 5 minutes just to talk about how you feel when events don't cater to your needs and how excluded you could sometimes be, that they would leave that meeting never not thinking about captions again. And ultimately, I think if there's one thing the mice industry can really empower, it's just connecting those people, the people that need that greater inclusive approach with the people that have the power to enable it. And we can then be a big catalyst and change. And that's an incredible thing. That should be a heartening thing.
First-hand experience.
Yeah,
Seeing
absolutely. No one meets someone and thinks, I don't want you to feel included. Even in something as thorny. And I hate that it's become thorny, and a lot of it's how the media reports it, which comes to your point, Mario, the pronouns thing.
Yeah.
I've never heard such kind of noise in the abstract, but then you meet someone for whom their pronouns are an incredibly important thing for them, and you get it immediately. And then you change your entire perspective. And I think it's about making sure that people that haven't had a voice for very long have a voice with the people in power.
So actually what we do, and as an example from my workplace, is that when we have new employees, since I have several colleagues who are blind working with web accessibility, we actually get the new employees to put blindfold on and kind of go with them. And the most exciting part is that they're going to go with my colleague Joachim to the grocery store and across the street to shop. It's terrifying for them having the blindfold on, and they're having Joachim holding in their hand and going, but it really changes their perspective on things. And we also do this with clients in terms of, they say, we have this perfect website, it's beautiful, it's designed, and then we let Joachim try to read the website, and he doesn't know, I think it was H&M we had. He tried to buy something for Christmas, he couldn't buy it. It looked good, but they didn't see it from their perspective. So I think that's something which is really interesting, just, put in the shoes somebody else's
and inclusive design is better. Netflix, you can actually understand what people are saying, and I can keep the volume low when the child's sleeping. But it's a better design.
And you can watch it in the bus.
Precisely. I mean, doors are a great example.
Or at meetings.
Having a foot opener for a door.
Yeah.
That's brilliant for someone who doesn't have full use of their arms. It's also really handy for someone that's holding 2 cups of coffee. And thinking about how inclusive design makes everyone's lives better is also central.
But the fundamental of inclusive design actually where it comes from is that if you make something useful for the one with the least ability, it becomes so much better for everybody else.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And I would like to also add that when you are intentionally inclusive, you will have lifelong brands. Like there's some brands that are inclusive from the start. Like they always subtitle the videos. I'm going to use Taylor Swift as an example. I don't care if you guys are a fan or not. But when she separated from her label, I noticed that all of her videos were captioned on YouTube when music videos are not really captioned on YouTube. And I was like, I even like this album, but I'm going to sit there and watch the entire thing because it was literally captioned, and it's not common for me to see a music video that's captioned. Now, YouTube has built-in captioning, but Vivo, I think that's what it's called, doesn't really, but I think I'm starting to notice more videos on Vivo. So it's just, you build brand loyalty when you are inclusive intentionally and you do the work to be put in. So we discussed this earlier. Speaking of brands, you mentioned you have a story about a brand who's doing great work with inclusion.
Well, not strictly a story, but the question was, who's doing this right?
Yeah.
And you asked that question,
Yes.
and we all looked at each other for a while, and we didn't say anything. And ultimately, it's a weird example, but and it's also fraught with its own issues. But I think of Disneyland.
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 I've never been.
So, if you're like me and you don't like crowds, it's a real problem. But for people for whom it's a real inability, they have tailored the park so that you can go through areas which are low footfall. For autistic children, they have sensory guidance. Pretty much everything is captioned if you need it. They have built that park to be fully inclusive. Now, this is separate from the corporation. The corporation is riddled with its own problems. But in terms of that theme park experience, someone has sat and thought about the experience from so many different angles that it's actually a fully inclusive environment. And the challenge, I almost think, is what if we thought of our events like Disneyland? What if we considered every journey from the viewpoint of someone with additional needs or different needs? And how would we change those experiences and how would they be better? People like Disneyland, regardless of their abilities or their needs. And how can we ape that view with hopefully lower ticket prices?
And I think also, usually when you talk about disabilities, you always kind of see that you have the permanent disabilities. It's a minority. But then if you look at the statistics, we're talking about 20%, which has permanent disabilities. If you then count if you have the cognitive, temporary others, I mean, you're talking it's a big group of people. And one thing is for sure that all of us are going to be part of this.
Yes.
And I think one challenge that we will have, we're talking about the younger generation, but another challenge is that the elderly, I mean, we're going to work much longer and we need to be able to attend these types of events, even if we're old and tired or bad vision. So I think you need to cater in both ends. But catering for one end, you will actually attract the other end.
Which is why we're heading to different pathways and different events within events. When I think of the ideal future, that's what I want to get to. You look even at something as simple as extroversion versus introversion from a data perspective. The ideal events for those two different cohorts are radically different. And so then you throw in maybe someone has ADHD. Maybe someone needs to read materials in advance to really get their opinions formulated before they attend. And then suddenly we're at a place where we need many different events within the umbrella of one event. And maybe IBTM 2030 is still in a big hall like this, but people are attending and going through sessions in many different ways. I'd be really excited by that.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up. I'm going to see if there's any questions or anything. This is an excellent opportunity. Either you do the Slido or
Please ask us questions. We
Just
know
one
it's
question.
the end of the day.
Just one question, someone. There's a question over there.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
I have one.
Yeah.
So what do
And you have a mic.
I have a mic.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
What do you see will come in 2023? You're part of this conversation.
What is coming 2023? I think us coming back to, I mean, I'm collecting into events and mice. I think us coming back to these types of events, and for me, it's been a while, I mean, attending this, but I see them completely different now than I did before the pandemic. I see them much more in wearing the eyeglasses in terms of, what shouldn't be happening something more? Shouldn't the information be presented to me differently? So I'm actually reflecting on it.
You want a personalized event experience?
Yes.
Yes.
More meaningful.
Ooh,
More
I like
meaningful, I would say. That's a short answer.
I think the true prediction is probably we will continue to see climate catastrophes, unfortunately, and the question of sustainability within travel will become more prescient. And so I would begin to like to see a more mature conversation around how we enable travel, how we enable meaningful digital inclusion, and how we begin to wrestle with the enormous carbon impacts of the events we run. Because year on year, the freak occurrences are only going to become more common, and therefore the conversations that the public will have will be more poignant.
Yeah.
What's your 2023 prediction?
I think that banks and businesses are going to not come back with the roaring, but move forward with the roaring, want to be more sustainable and more inclusive. So I think we're going to have greater conversations and impact on all of that. That's me not being cynical. That's me being hopeful.
I was going to say that's a very hopeful note to end on. That's a really
That's
good.
a good way to end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's end on that note. Something positive. Thank you, guys. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for being here.